The heart monitor beeped slow and steady, the only sound in a room my own son couldn't bother to visit for 13 years. When he finally walked in, his eyes didn't carry guilt, only calculation, the kind that counts inheritance before the body's cold. So when I asked the doctor for the papers, I made sure the pen I held would sign his lesson, not my surrender. That was 3 weeks ago. Even now, I can still feel the sterile chill of that hospital room on my skin, the faint smell of antiseptic mixing with the sting of something far sharper, recognition. Recognition that love, the kind you break your back and your heart for, can rot if it's fed to the wrong person. My name is Margaret Fields, 64 years old, retired teacher, widow for nearly 2 decades. I used to think my greatest legacy would be my son, Daniel, my only child, my reason for surviving after his father passed. But life, I've learned, has a cruel sense of humor. You spend your years pouring warmth into someone, only to find that what you raised wasn't a man, but a mirror of all the things you ignored: greed, pride, and absence. Daniel left home when he was 22, said he wanted space, freedom, a life that wasn't defined by his mother's small dreams. I didn't stop him. I sent him money when he asked, defended him when neighbors whispered about his failed startups, his drinking, his debts. Even when the calls stopped, I told myself he'd come around. I told myself I just had to wait. 13 years. Not a birthday, not Christmas, not a single message when I collapsed with that first heart attack. The silence stretched so long it became a companion, cold but predictable, until the day he appeared at the foot of my hospital bed like a ghost who'd found his way back, not through love, but through opportunity. He didn't even say my name at first. Just glanced around the room, smiled that half smile I used to think was charm, and said, "So, you really scared them this time, huh?" I wanted to believe there was concern hidden in the joke. I looked for it in his eyes. All I found was calculation. He sat down, crossing his legs like he owned the place. "Listen, Mom," he said. "I know things have been distant, but I've been thinking a lot lately about family, about how I should be here for you now." He reached for my hand, the same hand that once held his fevered forehead, and gave it a soft squeeze. Then, with a practiced pause, he added, "Especially since, well, you probably need someone to help manage your affairs. You don't want strangers handling your will, right?" The words hit me like a second heart attack, not because of what he said, but because of how naturally it rolled off his tongue. No hesitation, no shame, just business. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides a scream. "You came all this way for my will, Daniel." He laughed softly. "Don't make it sound so bad. I'm just saying, let's be smart about things. I could have yelled, I could have cried, but there's a point where grief burns itself out, and what's left is clarity, cold, hard, and clean." As the doctor walked in to check my vitals, I asked him for a favor. "Could you bring me the papers?" Daniel looked almost pleased. He thought I meant the will, the papers that would guarantee him the reward for his sudden concern. But I had something else in mind, something that had been quietly building inside me during all those silent years. Lying there, listening to the machine track every beat my heart had left, I thought of all the choices that had led us here. The missed dinners, the unanswered calls, the day he refused to attend his father's funeral because he was too busy closing a deal that never existed. And I realized this wasn't a new betrayal. It was just the final act of a story that had been written long ago. When the doctor returned, I signed those papers, medical consent forms, not for a will, but for a transfer to a private recovery facility where I'd have time to heal and to plan. Daniel leaned over, grinning. "Glad to see you're thinking ahead." I just nodded. "So am I, Daniel. So am I." He didn't see the shift in my eyes, but I felt it. Something old and tired had cracked open, and something steadier was taking its place. I wasn't the woman waiting by the phone anymore. I wasn't the mother begging to be remembered. I was the woman who'd finally learned that silence isn't patience, it's power. He thought he'd come to collect an inheritance. He had no idea he'd just inherited a storm. I didn't sleep much those first few nights in the recovery ward. The machines hummed and clicked in the dark, a mechanical lullaby that mocked me with its steadiness. Every sound brought back the image of Daniel's smirk, the one he wore when he thought he'd already won. Funny thing about heartbreak at my age, it doesn't come as an explosion anymore. It seeps, slow and steady, through the cracks of old memories. I kept thinking back to when Daniel was small. He used to run down the hallway in his father's oversized coat, dragging it across the floor. Said he wanted to grow into it. I'd laugh, straighten the collar, and tell him he already had his father's spirit, brave, ambitious, unstoppable. Turns out I was right about the ambition part. I just never expected it would grow teeth. When his father, Paul, died of a stroke, Daniel was only 19. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my hands shaking over a cup of coffee gone cold. He didn't cry. He just said, "What's going to happen to the house?" That should have been my first warning. But grief is a fog that makes even red flags look like rose petals. I sold my wedding ring that year to keep him in college. He didn't know that. Or maybe he did, and didn't care. Either way, I told myself it was worth it. That's what mothers do. We turn our bones into bridges and hope our children walk over gently. But Daniel ran. He ran from responsibility, from family, from me. When his calls came, they came with a request attached. "Just this once, Mum. I'll pay you back soon." I kept a little notebook of every transfer, $300 for rent, $500 for business supplies, $2,000 to keep the investors from walking. The notebook's still in my dresser, pages soft from being turned over too many times. I used to look at it when I missed him, convincing myself those numbers were proof of connection, not distance. By the time the silence settled in, I'd already begun shrinking my life down to fit the waiting. I stopped baking because it felt strange to eat something sweet alone. Stopped going to church because I was tired of pretending I wasn't jealous of women surrounded by children and grandchildren on Sundays. The house became an echo chamber. Every creak a reminder of someone who wasn't coming home. I tried reaching out once, around his 30th birthday. I mailed him a card, wrote a note inside that said, "I still believe in you." It came back unopened. Return to sender. That envelope sat on my kitchen counter for months, like a gravestone no one visited. Sometimes I'd catch myself imagining what kind of man he'd become, if he'd married, if he ever told stories about me. I even pictured us reconciling, sitting across a table, laughing about how time heals everything. But time doesn't heal what's never been acknowledged. It just buries it under layers of politeness until it festers. And then came the heart attack. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I was watering the little succulents by the window when a sharp pain tore through my chest. I remember thinking, so this is it. This is how it ends. Alone, surrounded by plants that need less than people do. The paramedics told me I was lucky. The word didn't fit. Luck would have been someone to hold my hand in the ambulance. Luck would have been hearing a familiar voice when I opened my eyes in the hospital. Instead, I got a nurse with kind eyes and a clipboard that said, "Next of kin, none." That's when I understood something simple but brutal. Love that isn't reciprocated becomes a kind of slow suicide. You keep giving parts of yourself away, thinking it's devotion, until one day you realize you've run out of pieces. So when Daniel showed up after 13 years of silence, asking to be in my will, I wasn't angry. I was hollow. And in that hollow space, something else began to take root. Clarity. I started rereading old letters, old bank statements. I wanted to remember, not just feel. The facts were all there, hiding in plain sight. Every sacrifice documented, every promise broken, every time I'd chosen to believe a lie because the truth was lonelier. I also thought about someone else, about Lydia, my late sister. She'd gone through the same with her daughter, Claire, a girl who'd married for money, then cut her mother off when the husband demanded it. Lydia died waiting for a call that never came. I used to judge her for her bitterness. Now, I understand it wasn't bitterness. It was knowledge, the kind you earn too late to change the ending. Maybe that's why Daniel's return didn't just reopen my wound, it reopened hers too. The women in my family, we've all been raised to love until it kills us, to give without asking for anything back. But I'm starting to wonder if that's not love at all. Maybe it's just conditioning dressed up as virtue. As I sat in that hospital bed, replaying all of it, I made a quiet promise to myself. If Daniel came back into my life to use me, then this time, I'd let him. But not the way he expected. I'd give him exactly what he came for, just long enough to watch him choke on it. He came back the next morning, carrying a paper cup of coffee as if it were an offering. "Extra sugar," he said, placing it on my tray like a son who remembered his mother's little comforts. He never noticed I stopped drinking coffee 10 years ago. Doctor's orders. I watched him stir it anyway, the plastic lid rattling against the cup. There's something eerie about seeing your child perform affection like a routine he learned from watching someone else. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Alive," I said. "That seems to surprise you." He laughed softly. "Don't say that. I was worried." "Were you?" My voice came out quieter than I meant. "When was the worrying supposed to start, Daniel? Before or after the will?" He froze, cup halfway to his lips. Then that polished grin came back, practiced and hollow. "Mum, don't start. I came here because I care. Can't we just move forward?" Move forward. That's what people say when they want to skip the part where they apologize. I folded my hands, watching the IV drip behind him. Moving forward requires remembering how we got here. He sighed, leaned back in his chair like a man exhausted by someone else's stubbornness. "I didn't come to fight. I'm trying to make peace, and well, you're making this difficult." "Peace?" I tilted my head. "You didn't visit for 13 years. Not when your father died. Not when I was sick the first time. Not when the bank almost took this house. But now you want peace. Because there's money involved." He set the coffee down a little too hard. "You always do this. You twist everything I say. I had my own life to build." "Yes," I said. "And you built it on the ashes of mine." His eyes hardened. "You're being dramatic." There it was. The word men use when they want to shrink a woman down to something manageable. I almost laughed. After everything, he still thought he could manage me. He pulled out his phone, opened something on the screen. "Look, I've been doing research on estate planning. You don't want strangers getting your money tangled up in probate." "I can handle it, Mom. I'm family." I stared at that glowing screen and saw what he couldn't. Not a son offering help, but a man drawing blueprints for his mother's grave. "Tell me something," I said. "When you think of me, if you ever do, what exactly do you see?" He looked confused. "What do you mean? Am I a person to you, Daniel? Or just an account waiting to be emptied?" He rolled his eyes. "God, you're impossible." I smiled faintly. "You get that from your father." That seemed to sting. Paul had been the only man Daniel ever tried to impress, and the only one who saw through him. "A heart full of ambition," Paul used to say, but no place to put it that isn't himself. At the time, I'd defended our boy. Now I realized Paul had just been early in his morning. Daniel stood up, pacing at the foot of my bed. "I didn't come here to be attacked." "No," I said. "You came here to collect. But it's funny. You only collect from the living." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You know what? Forget it. I was trying to do the right thing. That's what people say when they've already done the wrong one. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the room buzzing with the low hum of the machines. There was something strange about it. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry. I just felt done, like a woman who's seen every lie before and finally recognized the pattern. He grabbed his jacket and walked toward the door. But before he left, he turned back. "You always make it about guilt," he said. "You never see how hard I've worked. You think I've had it easy? Hard work doesn't excuse absence," I said. "It just gives it a nicer name." The door shut behind him with a soft click, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. That was the first real confrontation. Not loud, not violent, but final in a quiet way. A clean cut. After he left, Nurse Amelia came in to check my vitals. She was young, maybe 30, with tired eyes and a softness that hadn't hardened yet. "You okay, Mrs. Fields?" I nodded. "My son stopped by." "That's nice," she said, smiling. I looked at her for a long time before answering. "Yes, nice." She didn't need to know the truth, that it felt more like being robbed twice. Once of trust, then of illusion. That night, I went through the small box I kept by my bedside. Old photos, a wedding band, a folded note Paul had written me the year Daniel was born. "For the woman who makes home mean something." I read it over and over until the letters blurred. Paul had believed in permanence. I used to too. But that night I realized permanence isn't about blood or vows. It's about memory, and who deserves to keep it. So I made a decision. The next time Daniel walked into my room, I wouldn't meet him as a mother. I'd meet him as the woman he'd forgotten existed, the one who built her life from scratch and wasn't afraid to start again. And deep down, I knew he would come back. Men like him always do when they think they're still winning. He didn't stay gone for long. 2 days later, Daniel returned with a bouquet of lilies, Paul's favorite, not mine. That told me all I needed to know. He wasn't remembering me. He was rehearsing what affection looks like. "Thought I'd bring some color into this place," he said, setting the flowers down beside the monitor. His tone was light, but his eyes kept flicking toward the folder on my nightstand, the one labeled Estate and Health Documents. He'd seen it before. I'd placed it there deliberately, like bait. "Thank you," I said, motioning toward the chair. "You didn't have to." He smiled, too easily. "Of course I did. You're my mother." He said the word like it was a password, not a relationship. I let the silence hang for a bit, then asked, "So, tell me, how's work?" He cleared his throat. "It's fine. Trying to get a few things started, some real estate investments, a few partnerships." A few partnerships. I'd heard that phrase before. It used to mean another scheme. I reached for my glasses and picked up the newspaper from the table. "Is that why your name came up in the business section last week?" That wiped the smile clean off his face. "What are you talking about?" he asked, too quickly. I folded the paper and handed it to him. There it was. Local entrepreneur Daniel Fields faces allegations of misused investor funds. His face tightened. "That's exaggerated. The media twists things. It's not even official." "Is that why you came here then?" I asked quietly. "To make sure your name's on something more reliable than a startup." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, the calculation returning, sharper this time. "You think the worst of me?" he said. "You always have." "No," I said. "I used to think the best of you. That was the mistake." He looked away, jaw tight. "You don't understand how hard it is out there. Everyone's out to get you. Investors, clients, they all want something. I just need a little time to fix things. If you could put you in my will." I finished for him. He flinched. "That's not what I was going to say." Yes, it was. For the first time, he looked smaller, like a boy caught in a lie but too proud to apologize. "I'm not a bad person," he said. "Bad?" I echoed. "No, just hollow." The air between us thickened. He tried to recover, straightening his jacket. "You've always had a flair for drama." "Drama keeps me alive," I said. "Yours seems to keep you fed." He glared at me, and for the briefest moment, the mask slipped. There it was, the truth in his eyes. Desperation. Fear. Not of losing me, but of losing access. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just greed. He needed the money. Desperately. The allegations weren't noise. They were smoke from a fire he'd started long ago. I decided to test the flame. "You know?" I said, voice calm. "Paul left me a few things that aren't listed in the house records. Old accounts, documents, stocks. I never touched them. Maybe it's time I sort them out." He blinked. "Stocks." I nodded slowly. "Worth a fair bit, I imagine." He leaned forward. "Do you need help handling them? I know some people who could—" "There it is," I said softly. He frowned. "What?" "The reflex. You can't even let a sentence breathe before you lunge for the prize." He tried to laugh it off, but the sound was brittle. "You're reading too much into this." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm finally reading it right." That night, after he left, I called an old friend, Evelyn Hart, a retired accountant who used to work with Paul's firm. We hadn't spoken in years, but she still answered like no time had passed. "Margaret Fields?" she said, warmth in her voice. "You still breathing, old girl?" "Barely," I said, "but breathing's enough." I told her about Daniel, the visit, the sudden concern. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she sighed. "Men like that don't change," she said. "They just learn new ways to look sincere." I laughed softly. That's exactly what I needed confirmed. Evelyn agreed to look into Daniel's situation quietly. A few days later, she called back, her voice low. "Margaret, it's worse than you think. Your son's not just broke. He's cornered. He took money from people who don't forgive debts." I closed my eyes. "So it's not about inheritance. It's about survival." "Exactly. And if I were you, I'd be careful. Desperate people do stupid things." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. The next morning, when Daniel came back, he wasn't carrying flowers. He carried a thin smile and a thicker folder. "I did something for you," he said. "Got in touch with a lawyer. He can help formalize everything. Your estate, your care, all of it. It's a good deal." "A lawyer?" "His lawyer." "Generous of you," I said, forcing a small smile. "You always think ahead." He nodded. "It's what you raised me to do." I studied him quietly. Every syllable, every pause. He really believed he could play this game on my turf. "All right," I said finally. "Let's meet your lawyer." His relief was immediate. Too immediate. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't the end of his plan. It was just the next layer. He thought he'd found his way into my will. He didn't realize he'd just walked into my web. When he left that afternoon, folder in hand and ego soothed, I finally exhaled. My pulse had steadied into something colder, quieter. Not anger anymore, just calculation. I'd spent most of my life mistaking forgiveness for strength. But lying in that bed, staring at the ceiling tiles arranged like neat little graves, I understood that forgiveness without consequence isn't strength. It's surrender. So I began to plan. The first call I made was to Evelyn again. "He's trying to get me to sign something," I told her. She clicked her tongue. "I figured. I found out who he's working with. Some lawyer named Grant Weston. He's not exactly clean." "Meaning?" "Meaning he's been disciplined twice for coercing signatures from elderly clients. Daniel probably found him through the same people funding his little ventures." That made my stomach turn, but not with fear. More like disgust, dressed as clarity. "I want to see everything you can find on them both," I said. Evelyn chuckled softly. You're not thinking of going along with it, are you? Oh, I'm going along, I said, just not in the direction they expect. Over the next few days, I played my part well. I smiled when Daniel visited, asked polite questions about his lawyer, even feigned confusion about the process. He softened, mistaking my patience for weakness. That was his mistake. He always underestimated the quiet. Meanwhile, I began gathering my own paperwork: bank statements, old records from Paul's firm, the original deeds. I found documents Daniel had no idea existed, assets Paul had tucked away years ago, things in my name only. I felt like a ghost opening old coffins, but each one reminded me I still had something left: leverage. When I was discharged from the hospital, I returned to the house, dusty but standing, like me. The first thing I did was pull down the heavy box from the closet. Inside were all the things I hadn't been ready to face: our mortgage papers, Paul's death certificate, and that notebook filled with every dollar I'd ever sent Daniel. I laid it all out on the dining table like evidence in a trial, because that's what this was becoming: a trial. And Daniel was about to be both defendant and witness. That night, Evelyn came over with her laptop and a bottle of wine. "You're sure you want to do this?" she asked. "I've spent my whole life cleaning up his messes," I said. "This time he can clean up mine." She smiled at that, pouring 2 glasses. "Then we'll make it airtight. What's the goal?" "Simple," I said. "I'll make him believe he's getting what he wants, right up until the ink dries on something very different." Evelyn laughed quietly. "Margaret Fields, you might have missed your calling as a con artist. Motherhood trains you well," I said. The next morning, Daniel arrived again, punctual, eager, and wearing the kind of confidence that comes from assuming you're the smartest person in the room. He introduced me to his lawyer, Grant Weston, a man who smelled like aftershave and arrogance. "Mrs. Fields?" he said smoothly, shaking my hand. "Your son tells me you're ready to make some important decisions." "I am," I said, smiling. "I've thought a lot about what's fair." He nodded approvingly. "Good. That's all we want, to make sure your wishes are properly documented." He didn't notice Evelyn sitting quietly in the corner, pretending to be my friend from church. Or maybe he did, but dismissed her. Older women blend easily into the background when men think money's the only thing in focus. Grant began laying out the documents: a will draft, a power of attorney, a few standard agreements. The way his pen hovered near the signature lines told me exactly how many times he'd done this before. "Take your time reading it," he said, "but it's mostly boilerplate." I adjusted my glasses and glanced through. The wording was subtle, but clear enough. Power of attorney transferred to Daniel immediately upon my signature. He'd have access to all financial accounts within 24 hours. Clever, almost elegant in its cruelty. I looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "I trust my son. If he says this is right, I believe him." Daniel looked both touched and triumphant. "You won't regret it, Mum." "I rarely do," I said. "But just to be safe, could I have a copy for my records?" Grant hesitated. "Of course," he said eventually. Evelyn met my eyes, her expression saying everything. Patience. Once they left, she and I got to work. Using the draft as a template, we created my own version. Same look, same layout, but with a few key changes. My estate wouldn't go to Daniel. It would go to a charitable foundation I'd set up years ago in Paul's name, one that supported scholarships for underprivileged students. Daniel would still be mentioned, of course, just not how he expected. His name appeared only once, under the clause titled Irrevocable Disinheritance. Evelyn grinned as we finished. "You really are something, Margaret." "I'm just tired of dying politely," I said. We printed the new documents, placed them neatly in a folder identical to the one Daniel had brought. I even used the same cheap pen he'd handed me, the one engraved with his company's name. When he came back for the final signing, he'd find everything ready. He'd smile, confident, certain he'd finally claimed his victory. And I'd smile back, because he'd be right. He would claim something that day, just not what he'd planned. The day of the signing came draped in stillness, the kind that comes before a storm finally decides it's had enough patience. Daniel arrived wearing a navy suit, tie slightly crooked. He'd tried to look professional, but desperation doesn't iron out easily. Grant trailed behind him, smug and efficient, carrying the same polished briefcase from before. "Morning, Mum," Daniel said, kissing the air near my cheek. His cologne lingered. Expensive, loud, temporary. I'd worn my plainest cardigan. Let them think I was small. People like that always make the same mistake. They confuse simplicity with surrender. Grant opened his folder. Papers spread neatly across the table. "Everything's ready," he said. "Once you sign, we'll have it filed this afternoon." Evelyn sat quietly beside me, playing the role of my timid friend again. Only this time, her eyes gleamed with a private fire. I took the pen. My hands didn't tremble. That surprised me. I thought maybe justice would come with nerves, with shaking. But no, justice, when it's been ripening for years, feels steady. Daniel hovered, a little too close. "You sure you're okay, Mum? I can explain anything you don't understand." I met his eyes. "You always could, Daniel, even when you shouldn't have." He smiled like it was a compliment. I signed the papers slowly, deliberately, on every line Grant indicated. My copy, the real one, was already tucked away in the second drawer of the desk. They'd never know. Not yet. When I was done, Grant gathered the pages with the reverence of a man who thinks he's closing a deal. "Excellent," he said. "I'll have these processed right away." "Wait," I said. "Let's get a photo, for the record." Daniel blinked. "A photo? Just to mark the moment. My son helping me secure my legacy. Seems worth remembering." He grinned. "Of course." Evelyn took the picture. Me at the table, Daniel behind me, Grant to my right. Both men smiling, unaware they were posing for evidence. When they left, I watched their car disappear down the drive. Evelyn poured me a glass of water, her voice quiet. "You did it." "No," I said. "I started it." The next step came faster than I'd imagined. 2 days later, I received a call from the bank. "Mrs. Fields, we received a notice authorizing access to your accounts," the woman said carefully. "Are you confirming this transfer?" My hand tightened around the receiver. "Yes," I said softly. "Please allow the transaction. But record every withdrawal. I'll need full statements sent to both me and the legal department of the Fields Foundation." She hesitated. "The foundation?" "Yes," I said. "You'll find it listed on my estate file. It's under new management now." Evelyn had already prepared the paperwork. The Fields Foundation, something Paul and I had started decades ago but never fully activated, was now legally active again, with her as co-trustee. Every cent Daniel thought he was inheriting was being redirected there. Legally binding, irrevocable, public. By the time Daniel realized the accounts weren't cooperating, the foundation would already hold control, and there would be no undoing it. That evening he called. His voice was sharp around the edges. "Mum, there's some confusion with the bank. They're saying the accounts are restricted. Did you authorize that?" "I did," I said calmly. "What? Why would you—" "To protect your father's name," I interrupted. "And mine." He went silent. I could hear his breathing, tight, furious. "You tricked me." "No," I said. "You assumed. You don't understand what you've done. I needed that money." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I couldn't give it to you." He started shouting then. Words I'd never imagined hearing from my child. Accusations. Blame. The raw, panicked voice of a man watching his last lifeline slip through his fingers. When he ran out of breath, I said one last thing. "Daniel, You can still visit me, just not as a beneficiary, as a son, if you remember how." Then I hung up. 2 weeks later, the news broke. Local entrepreneur Daniel Fields under investigation for financial misconduct. His photo sat right beside the headline. His confident smile frozen. That same suit, that same tie. The one from the picture Evelyn had taken. It was over quicker than I expected. When you pull the rug out from under a liar, it's not the fall that kills him. It's the silence that follows. He came to see me one last time. No flowers this time. No folder. Just a man stripped bare. "They froze my accounts," he said, voice low. "They said your lawyer sent them something." I nodded. "She did. It's all legitimate." He sank into the chair, staring at the floor. "You wanted to ruin me." "I wanted to remember myself," I said. He looked up, eyes wet with something between rage and shame. "You're just like Dad. Cold." "Your father wasn't cold," I said softly. "He just stopped lighting fires for people who never stayed warm." He didn't answer. He just stood and left. The sound of the door closing was final, like a judge's gavel. That night, I sat in the same chair, letters and photos spread across the table again. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not joy. Peace. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. I wrote one final note for Daniel, sealed in an envelope. "When you're ready to be a son again, I'll be here. But you'll have to meet me as an equal, not a claimant." I placed it beside the empty coffee cup he'd left behind all those visits ago. A small relic of what used to be love, now quiet evidence of what love must become when it finally learns to protect itself. The weeks after Daniel's downfall were quieter than I expected. No fireworks, no grand closure, just air that finally felt breathable. The newspapers had his name printed under words like fraud and misappropriation. I didn't gloat, I just folded the paper neatly and put it away. Some truths don't need celebration. They just need daylight. Evelyn kept me company through the noise that followed. She'd come by with soup and updates from the Fields Foundation. "Applications are flooding in," she said once. "Your husband's name carries weight again." Paul would have smiled at that. The same man whose savings Daniel once dismissed as dead money was now funding scholarships for kids who'd known hunger, but not opportunity. The irony wasn't lost on me. Life began to stretch out again. Mornings started with the sound of the kettle instead of the phone. I tended the garden, trimming away what had overgrown in my absence. Even the air seemed lighter. Not happy, but clean. Daniel called twice. The first time he wanted to talk. The second time he left a message, his voice tight, almost cracking. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't know what else to do." I saved it. Not as forgiveness, but as evidence that remorse, however late, had finally found its way to his tongue. A few weeks later, I got a letter. No return address, just familiar handwriting. Inside, a photo of him by a small coastal diner, apron on, eyes tired but human again. "I'm trying to be better," the note read. "I hope one day you'll let me make it right." I folded it carefully and placed it beside Paul's note in my box. Love doesn't die, I thought. It just changes recipients. The foundation grew quickly. Letters from students arrived every week. Thank yous, stories, hopes. One boy wrote that he wanted to study law to help people who can't afford fairness. I smiled at that line. Maybe the world was still redeemable, just not through the people we expect. Evelyn and I often sat on the porch with tea, watching the sun bleed out over the garden. "You know," she said once, "you didn't destroy him. You just stopped protecting his version of you." She was right. I hadn't sought revenge. I'd reclaimed myself. Revenge burns fast. Reclamation lasts. Sometimes I still see the boy Daniel used to be, the one who wore his father's coat, sleeves dragging along the floor. I mourn him, not the man he became. I suppose both of us lost something we couldn't return. One night, a storm rolled through. Power went out. The house flickered with candlelight. I sat by the window, listening to the wind test the walls. Everything held. The garden bent, but it didn't break. That's how I see myself now. Weathered, rooted, still standing. I thought about that day in the hospital, his voice saying, "I'll help, if you put me in your will." How calmly I'd smiled and asked for the papers. How he mistook strategy for surrender. He thought he was watching me give up. I was watching him reveal where to cut. Now, when I look out the window each morning, I don't wait for his car. I don't wait for anyone. My peace isn't an apology. It's proof I survived my own forgiveness. Justice didn't roar for me. It whispered, "Now you can rest."